Hi everybody, welcome back to Happy Little Diodes. Today we've got a Toastrack on the bench. It's from eBay, it's sold as not working, and there was a picture included showing that it is indeed knackered. So what we're going to do today is take our time. We're going to repair, service and refurbish the entire machine, as well as giving it a good thorough cleaning. It's raining outside, so let's make ourselves a coffee and get into it. While the coffee's being made, let's have a quick look around the machine. Looking at these legs, I can see that the foam is missing from the bottom of them, so we're going to need to replace that. Should be fairly easy to do. In general though, the machine seems to be in fairly good condition, in that I'll be able to clean it up and replace any missing parts without too much issue and bring it back to looking in a fairly new condition. Things like these feet which are missing should be easy to replace. There's a few screws missing as well, and I've got lots of new screws that we can dig into. The biggest issue I can see is this broken corner of the case with a rounded off rusted screw. We'll deal with that later. Flipping the machine back over, let's have a look at the front in a little bit more detail. The sticker down here is damaged, and I think I can get a replacement one of those fairly easily, so that will be a nice finishing touch when we finish repairing this machine. I don't think there's any point trying to repair the sticker itself by painting it or whatever, we'll just put a new one on. Looking underneath the keycaps, we can see that the case is really quite dirty, especially now we're a bit more up close to it, so we're going to need to tear the whole case down and clean every single key and the case components individually, so we can have a nice action on the keyboard and sleep soundly knowing that there isn't piles of dust under there. The keys are surprisingly grimy. Normally there is dust in the corner here where the raised profile on the front of the key is, but the actual edges of each key look like they've even been wet at some point in the past. I don't know where this has been stored. Hopefully this hasn't migrated all the way down to the PCB and caused some problems with our electrical components. We'll find out soon. Same case for the heatsink, the actual Toastrack as it's called. It looks a little bit dirty and grimy. We're going to need to get in there with a cotton bud. Now how about this corner? This screw has been rounded off, somebody's failed to remove it, and the plastic has been broken off when the case has been pulled apart. So we're going to have to try and extract that plastic and glue it back together. As I mentioned, we've got missing feet, and we have missing foam from these stilts or legs, however you like to call them. Both of those will be easy to replace. The feet you need to buy from someone who's been specifically making replacement feet, but the foam we can just cut from foam sheet from the craft shop. So let's open up and see what our PCB is looking like. First thing I noticed is there's no keyboard ribbons. The keyboard membrane has gone away, but that's okay. I have a pile of new ones on the shelf, and I would normally replace the keyboard membranes on a Toastrack anyway, just to give it some longevity. Luckily we have the stilts here, those red stilts, often they're broken, so I'm happy about that. Let's remove these legs and have a look at our board. The reset switch is already out of its holder, but the holder is in good condition thankfully, so we can pop that back in once we finish working on the board. Here's our 5V voltage regulator, and we need to remove the connector from this in order to remove the PCB from the case. Some more points of interest: the ZX8401 and the Z80 are not socketed, they've never been replaced. We have a EEPROM with nothing covering the window, so we'll need to put a sticker over there for the ROM. Here's our toroid, and it's in place amazingly, so we won't need to re-glue that down. Here's our AY chip, very important chip, just showing you it because it's interesting to see. And finally, we have the ULA here, 85, week 41, and hopefully nothing's wrong with that. We will find out soon. Oh, and there's no lid on the modulator. We're not going to use the modulator, but I'm definitely going to replace that lid just for completion. If you hadn't already spotted it, this is a 6K board. There's a 6U and a 6K variant of the Toastrack boards, and we've got a 6K. And I wouldn't be a videographer with a new macro lens if I didn't zoom into the insides of an EEPROM. So here's our EEPROM before I end up putting a sticker over it. So it's time to remove the PCB from the case. We can have a look at the underside. Luckily, so far we haven't spotted any problems with damp, so maybe it wasn't any kind of water that we saw on the keyboard. So how about our startup tests? The first thing I'm going to do is test the resistance of the 5V voltage supply to ground. I'm going to repeat that test for the 12V voltage supply. So I'm picking a 5V supply from a RAM chip and we're getting close to 400 ohms, which seems ballpark about right, nothing to worry about when powering up. And the 12V supply goes to this chip down here in the bottom right, and we're getting something in the range of 1.5 kilo ohms. Again, nothing to worry about there, I think. I'll be happy to plug this in with the current limiting power supply. Right now I'm just doing a quick sanity check. It's one of my new favourite tests, is to check the resistance of each data line to ground and check that they are roughly the same, and they seem to be in the order of 6 kilo ohms, and there's no massive variation, which gives me some hope that I'm not going to be searching for hard to find shorts. So let's set up our power supply to 9V with a current limit of, say, 800 milliamps. That should do us because I'm going to be using a switching voltage regulator while I'm working on the board. Using this Traco, I'm just going to pop it into the connector that we removed earlier. The pins are quite thin on the Traco, so in the end I used a different one which had slightly thicker pins and it was more reliably staying in place. Before measuring any voltages, I want to see the current draw, and it's not too high, so I'm happy that nothing is being fried while I'm testing, and it's not too low, so I'm happy that the board must be doing something. Let's set up for DC voltage measurement, and we'll measure the 5V and the 12V that we measured earlier on resistance mode. That's very close to 5V, I'm happy with that. How about the 12V supply? And yeah, also happy with those numbers. There is a -5V to the edge connector, but that's not important for the operation of the board, so I'm not going to measure that. Let's jump straight to plugging it in and taking a look at the video output, which will tell us a lot more information about what's wrong with this machine. And yeah, it's definitely telling me that the machine is knackered. Probably Z80 with these horizontal black and white bars, I guess. We're going to do a bit more digging around and see what we can find. The first really easy test we can do is to replace the ROM. Why not? It's socketed and you never know, that could be the cause of the problem. So let's do a test with my spare ROM in, and no, that's basically exactly the same failure mode, so that's the end of that test. Also very easy to plug in a diagnostic ROM on this board. This is the one from Retrolium, and let's see if anything different happens. No, nothing different. Very much suspecting the Z80 is a problem here. Let's get the scope out briefly and have a quick check around before we do the massively destructive job of removing the old Z80 chip. I do get a lot of questions about this scope. It is just a Chinese handheld battery powered scope from Amazon. I don't think you can actually buy this exact model anymore, but there are lots like it. The only reason I haven't done a review is because I'm just not an expert with oscilloscopes. I don't even have a decent one on the bench. I'm not that familiar with them. All I know is it does the job for me. I can see if a signal is around about 5V, and I can see if a signal is around about the right frequency and if it's around about the right shape, such as we're doing here. I'm probing the address lines on the Z80. Well, I probed all the pins, but the address lines were the interesting ones. If I pause here, you can see that we were getting just basically noise. It seems like none of the address lines were being driven correctly, and we know that the Z80 is what drives those address lines. That's the thing that sends out the addresses from which it wants to read or to which it wants to write. So I think this has failed fairly majorly. Some kind of driver circuit for the address lines is not working correctly. So let's remove it, possibly the last chip I'll ever remove, with the handheld solder pump. Thanks to a charitable donation from Lee at More Fun Making It. Cheers Lee. Link to his channel in the description, go and subscribe right now. In any case, this Z80 came out without too much protest. Here we are just finishing the job, waggling these pins until it falls out. And there it goes, it's gone. Let's remove it. We're going to clean up the area underneath the chip, and we're going to put a socket in its place after a quick visual inspection for any damage to the joints or traces. Well, everything here is looking fantastic. I'm pretty certain that our issue hasn't come from any damage to the PCB, and it must be the chip itself which isn't working. So I'm going to go around all of these joints with a soldering iron and clean them up so that our socket drops in without any resistance. And of course, while the sofa is out, we should clean the floor underneath it. Time to put in our new 40 pin socket. And of course we want this neat and flush to the board, so what I've been doing is soldering all 4 corners and then pushing from the front side while melting each of the joints in turn to make sure that our socket is sitting directly onto the board and not too wonky. Now it's just a case of soldering up the remaining joints. I've got a couple of new Z80s left in the box. We'll pick one of these. I don't think we should have any issue using a new type Z80 on a Toastrack, although you might find that you get problems when you fit one of these to an earlier 48K Spectrum. As promised, I'm going to put a sticker over the window on our 128K ROM. And let's see what we have when we power up. Yep, that looks a lot better. If it looks a little bit blue, that's because the SCART cable's a bit dodgy that I'm using. How about the Diagnostic ROM? Give that a quick whiz through, and all tests were passed, which is fantastic news. So the electrical repair is complete. Now we can get on to the service part of the job, and the first thing we're going to do is replace the electrolytic capacitors. They all are quite old now, and although the machine is working and it's probably got quite a few years left in it, I do feel that replacing the caps will give it a bit more life. As you can see, my process is to put the board in a vise. I cut the leg close to the capacitor body, remove the body and the remaining leg, and then clean up the joints like this. I have stepped up my game recently and bought myself one of these jigs to get a nice right angle bend in the legs of components that I'm fitting. Although I think I chose the wrong size here, you'll see it doesn't quite go in right. But anyway, the next step in the process is to put the replacement capacitor back in, being careful to use one of the same value and of a voltage rating at least the same as the one I removed. And of course being wary of the polarity of the part and the markings on the board, which aren't always right. I do the soldering with the board still vertical in the vise, just because it's a bit quicker this way, and then chop the excess legs off and move on to the next capacitor. On the Toastrack I tend to do them one at a time, although I'm more familiar with the 48Ks and I might do a few or all of them in one go. I wasn't too happy that this was looking a tiny little bit wonky, so I'm going to straighten it up. Perfect. With that done, we could stop and we could be happy with our working Toastrack, but I want to perform the Jailbar mod because I noticed some jail bars when we tested earlier. Maybe you can spot them here, the vertical bands. If I adjust the colours and the hue and the saturation, they come out quite clearly. The way we're going to address this is by changing C28, C7 and C8. Now I have cheated a bit. When I recapped, I put the correct value in to C28 for the Jailbar mod, so now I only need to change C7 and C8, which are a little bit tricky to access. I can't get my snips in there to snip C8, so let's get C7 out and maybe we can get C8 out without having to cut any of the legs. And it should just bend up like this if I heat the other side of the joint, and there we go, it's out now, nice and easy. With those removed, we can pop in our new 1 microfarad ceramic caps and our Jailbar mod is complete. Incidentally, C28 is replaced with a 47 microfarad capacitor. Here's an unusual view of soldering a joint. Cool. Okay, there's our anti-jailbar mod complete. Let's have a look at the result on our video output. Yeah, I'd say that is miles better. If I do adjust the video settings, we can still see them, but with normal settings, no, I couldn't tell that they were there. Some games when played on this machine exhibit a rain effect, and for that we're going to perform an Unra Mod, which is a very sensible name for a mod. First I want to show you the effect. Here's Robocop 3 loaded from a DivMMC, and the rain effect is very obvious. The game's not unplayable, but there's obviously something wrong here. We're going to address that by replacing the PAL chip with a newly programmed GAL chip, and I've got one right here. I'd love to do a video on excruciating detail of how this mod works and why the issue exists in the first place. Maybe I'll get round to that one day. But for now we're just going to replace this chip and I'll show you the improvement afterwards. I'm just going to use sheer willpower to remove it, and there we are. How quick was that? Lovely. We're going to have a quick look at the chip and we're going to remind ourselves not to throw it away because it's not broken. That will be going in the drawer with the other PAL chips that I have. Let's clean up these joints and we can fit a socket. And I did put the socket in upside down, whoops-a-daisy, never mind, it's going to work anyway. We'll solder it in place and then we need to fit one extra wire because the GAL chip utilises an extra pin over the PAL chip, which isn't provided for on the PCB routing. So we've camouflaged in this patch cable in green. It's going from pin 28 of the CPU, which is the refresh pin, and it goes into the GAL chip. And I guess some clever logic has been programmed into the GAL chip to make use of this signal to mitigate the rain effect. Let's plug it in and have a look at how our game looks now. I would say that's a billion times better, not a single raindrop in sight. And I did get a bit carried away testing it here because it's actually quite a good game. I've not played it before. Maybe I'll play it one time on a stream. Picking another job from the list, I'm going to clean the edge connector with a fiberglass pen. You need to be quite rough with it, but you do get a good result. Cleaning off all the garbage with alcoholic spirit and a toothbrush, and not forgetting to clean the underside as well. This should improve the performance and stability of any expansion devices that we plug in the back. Next up, we've covered this a lot on the channel before, but we can change the value of R115 to improve the audio balancing between the beeper and the AY chip, two different sound sources on the spectrum. They were really not balanced very well with this value resistor in there, and it is a big difference, which I can show you when playing Midnight Resistance at some point in the future, just how good the improvement is. There we go, another job ticked off the list. So what's next? Well, I think we should start taking the case to pieces and get to work cleaning that and sorting out this new keyboard membrane. So I've removed all of the screws, including the screws that hold these clamps down, because we're going to need to clamp our new keyboard ribbons in. We have a plastic backplate. I think the best backplates to have are metal ones, but no problem, the plastic one does the job. Here's the bubble mat, which looks quite clean, although it has got a bit dusty. Closer look at that soon. We'll be cleaning that too. And that just leaves all of our keys. There they are. I'm having flashbacks now to cleaning keys, and we'll be doing that again soon. It does take a while. I kind of like how the keys sit flush like this. It looks a bit more like Spectrum Next or something, but yeah, unfortunately it's not going to work like this. So it's time to dismantle the keyboard, and all you need to do is push the plunger from the back and you can remove it by hand. The plunger will then drop out, and as you work your way around you'll reveal more and more crud and dust and hair and garbage. Some of it has fallen through onto the bubble mat here, so we'll have to give that a quick rinse and a quick brush. Let's get the rest of the keys off. You'll notice that I left the spacebar until last. That's because there is a metal rod on the underside, which we need to be careful with. We'll remove that very carefully because there are two tabs on the spacebar key which are quite delicate and do break off and are hard to repair. There we go, then it just comes out like a normal key with its own plunger. The plungers are quite complex shapes really to tool up, I imagine, but they do the job. Here's our tabs on the spacebar. This particular variant has a strengthening rib up the side, but some of them don't even have that, so you do need to be very careful not to yank it out and break those tabs off. We're going to de-rust this rod a little bit, just pop it into a jar with some rust remover for a day or two, and it should clean up nicely. And as I mentioned, there is a lot of garbage under here which is going to need cleaning up. Going to do that with a hot soapy water bath and then a brush down with some brushes and toothbrushes and stuff like that. Before I drop it into soapy water, I'm going to remove the heatsink from the side. I noticed that the top screw wasn't biting into anything. I expect that the column underneath is damaged. Yeah, it is. We'll deal with that later one way or another. What's next? Well, I've given all the keys a hot soapy bath, and now I'm going to give them all a quick wipe down with a cloth, taking care to give every surface some attention and really dig my nail in to the right angle profile around this curved part of the key, just to get all the dust out from there. And this one's looking really nice. This is a time-consuming process, but let's see what we can do, see if we have the patience to clean every single key. In the meantime, the case was taking a bath and it does look a bit better. I am still going to give it some TLC with alcoholic spirit and a brush and give it another rinse down after that, and it should be looking a lot better. I'm repeating the same thing for the underside of the case while I'm at it. No hot soapy bath for the heatsink. I'm just going to use the alcoholic spirit, a cloth and a cotton bud to do my best to clean it up. And I think it did come out pretty good in the end. Now that the case is clean, we can put in some replacement feet. I've had these two in the drawer for a long time, years I think, and actually they went in perfectly. Look at this, that looks like a brand new one to me. I must remember where I bought these from and buy some more, because this is my last two. They were a little bit difficult to get into place, really needed to kind of drag them and shape them through the opening, but once they're in there, they're not going anywhere, and they really do look the part. Quite impressed with that. Here's the top side of the case anyway after I've finished cleaning it, so I'm going to reassemble it now, placing all of the keys back in onto their plungers. This is the same process as before in reverse, just put the plunger through from the back and hold it in place, then pop the key on, taking care that the key goes in the right way round and in the right place. There are special plungers for the shift keys and for the return key, you can't really go wrong there. Okay, just the spacebar to go, I've left that till last again. Let's check up on this de-rust process of this rod, and yeah, that's looking nice and clean. I think it's lost a little bit of shininess from the process, but the rust has gone, that's the most important thing. So we can fit that in place, and our keyboard will be complete. Now for the tricky bit. This screw is really stuck in there and really rounded off, so filling with pliers, I thought maybe I'd be able to drill it out or at least remove it using the stuck screw removal bit thing. I'm sure you've all seen these before. The idea is that you drill out some hole, some profile with the right hand side of the bit, and then put your drill into reverse and it should come out from friction. But what actually happened was I think I heated up the plastic column support that the screw goes into enough that I was able to wiggle the broken piece of plastic out, and then I was able to remove the screw using pliers and put the big horrible destructive drill away. Okay, so it's out, we haven't destroyed anything further, and we can see that it is very rusty, which might have something to do with why it was stuck in the first place. We better clean things up a bit, so I used cotton buds and some tweezers to scrape around and kind of did an okay job of cleaning up the hole there. The piece which had broken off was a little bit warped, so when I tried to place it back where it belongs, it wouldn't quite sit right. So I've had to cut and shape it a little bit just to get it to go roughly into the right place to give it the rectangular shape that we need to fit the top half of the case. And here we are, I've fitted it using Loctite, and Loctite is absolutely fantastic, quite terrifying how effective it is, so careful with that stuff. And after a day of curing, I'm ready to continue rebuilding the machine. So bubble mat goes on first, and then our keyboard membrane goes on. We align it using the nifty little pins here on the left and right, and our back plate can go on afterwards. Then we need to fit all of these screws, and don't try and get away with leaving any out because the keys close to that screw will not work. What I tend to do is nip them all up a little bit and then go around them all, nipping them up tight, but not over tightening because plastic tends to break when you do that. We then need to fit these two clamps, and there's a certain way they go on. There's a big recess and a tapered hole on the other side. Be careful to get it the right way around or you'll have trouble. They do need to be tight in order for the keyboard ribbon to function correctly. And the way I do this, avoiding things pinging off into the air, is again to nip them both up tight-ish and then go one to the other, nipping them up pretty tight. Same for the other clamp on the other side, the other ribbon, and that's our keyboard fitted and ready to go. Next I replaced the foam pads from the end of the legs. I did this by cutting them out of foam sheet, and I lost the footage of me doing that, but on a positive note, when I drove to Hobbycraft to pick up the foam sheet, I stumbled across a record fair and got a really good condition copy of Moving Pictures by Rush, so that's a result. So with our board nicely cleaned, I'm going to replace the reset switch which I had removed earlier, being careful to do so without losing any length on the wires because ultimately they will end up not being able to reach the side of the case or being too tight. I have a spare modulator lid. I'm going to pop that on there. That's a nice shiny one, obviously not original to the board and the date code is probably not accurate, but at least it looks nice. Now we can refit the heatsink, and what about this support which is damaged? Well, I'm just going to use a slightly longer screw. Not so long that it'll poke out the bottom of the case, but hopefully it will give it enough bite so that I can avoid having to try and rebuild that support up. And it does seem to have worked. So let's rebuild this entire unit. Starting with the legs and the stilts, we will get a look at the foam replacement I've done on those legs in a minute. One on each side. I am glad I have red stilts. I think red ones are pretty funky and they are original. Now the PCB can go in. And we can pop the reset switch into its place. Here's one last look at the repair job on the corner of the case here. I could probably sand it down a bit and make it look a little bit neater, but I don't want to mess with it because it's on there now. I've got new screws to screw the motherboard to the case, and we just need to pop the voltage regulator back in by connecting this connector, being careful that it's going on the right way around. Now we can put the top half of the case on, not forgetting to plug in the keyboard ribbons into the two connectors. Okay, hold your breath. I'm going to screw this screw in around this repair job and we'll see if it breaks off. I'm deliberately not going to torque it all the way up, just enough that it's sitting flush and looking neat and won't fall out. Okay, I think we've got away with it just about. As promised, here's the new foam on the feet. That foam sheet was about £1 for a sheet, so worth getting some just in case you need to do this yourself. And that completes our refurbishment and repair and service. Let's have a little look around at our lovely clean shiny toasty. I suppose I best test it for a few hours playing Robocop. I know what you're thinking, what about this sticker? I hadn't forgotten, we're going to have to do this because this is going to be the cherry on top, so I've managed to remove it using some tweezers. We'll clean all this garbage up, and I've got a brand new replacement sticker to go on. There it goes. Perfect, look at that. Such a snug fit, I was worried it was going to sit proud, but actually it went on perfectly in the end. Now we're finished for real this time. So I hope you enjoyed that video, a bit longer than usual, but I wanted to take our time with this one. Please like and subscribe and share with your friends. See you for the next one.